There's a picture of my grandfather in a drugstore. It must have been in the winter with his coat and his hat, wearing gloves, and he's hugging a Jew. You don't see the Jew's face, but an old Jew, obviously not a Talmid Chacham, someone wearing, you can tell he was a simple Jew, hugging him. And someone asked me, what's the story behind this picture? And I said, that's the story. I don't know if you even met this person before. It was amazing that he was able to relate of all spectrums of Judaism, religious, traditional, Hasidish, Satmar, Zionist, anti-religious. I was walking with him by Schneller, which is today apartments, but then it was still an army base, and there were soldiers outside. He stopped each soldier, gave him a hug, and he wrote down their name. He says, our Talmidim want to daven for you. He was always looking to do something, always looking to do for the klal, and he loved everyone.
Berachim Abayim, and welcome to Torah Talks Chazaq's program with special guests. We have with us all the way from Lakewood, Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetzky. Baruch haba, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you
How
so
you
much.
doing?
Very good, Baruch Hashem. Pleasure to be here.
Joining us.
Really amazing.
And we've had the zchut to have your great uncle over here. We've had the zchut, the merit to have your father over here. And we're going to be discussing creating a path within the Kamenetzky legacy. And if we get a little bit back about yourself and the great work you're involved in.
Thank you so much. Really, I'm fascinated by Chazaq. I've seen it around so many times, but actually to be here and to see...
Ain't no dumb familiar. You can't get
that's true.
hearing and seeing.
How many people are actually here, busy, working, and what you're doing is like, well, this is a real place. It's really so. Keep up the good work. Really fascinating.
Thank you, Hashem. We want to do more with God's help.
Bez Hashem. What a tremendous Kiddush Hashem. It's funny you mentioned my great uncle, Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetzky, and I get it all the time. I think there's only 4 Shmuel Kamenetskys in the world, maybe 5, but I get it all the time. It's, Shmuel Kamenetzky, you look younger and all that. And I started saying recently, we're named after the same great grandfather. So it's Rabbi Shmuel also used to make the same joke to me. It's your name, Shmuel Kamenetzky, but. Yeah, so I guess
It's great. I was telling people I have a Torah talk with Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetzky. Like, really? How's he feeling?
Yeah. I mean, it is the elephant in the room. Shmuel Kamenetzky, right away, people think, I remember one time, before I speak for myself, just one cute anecdote to start off.
Sure.
When I was in Kollel in Lakewood, it's probably going back 15 years ago, there's a very nice program that was in one of the shuls called Lunch and Learn, where there was a mincha, and then after mincha, there was a 15-minute shir, and then there was a boxed lunch, and people took it and went home. And I would fill in. I would be like a substitute once in a while. So I guess there was a text that goes out to the members, like who's saying the shir that day. So I guess the text said, it said that Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetzky sang the shir. So I came to Mincha. I said the shir was on Hilchos Muktzah, I remember. And after the shir, people started leaving. 1 or 2 people stayed around to ask a few questions. And I'm about to leave, and someone comes running up the steps, sweating and panting. He walks into the room, and he's like, "Is Rashiva still here? Is Rabbi Shmuel still here?" And I wasn't thinking. I was like, "Rabbi Shmuel who?" He's like, "Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetzky." And I realized what happened. I was like, no, okay, sorry for misunderstanding. I don't know. It's me. I don't know if I can help you, but...
That is hilarious.
Okay, so about myself. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My father was in Kollel over there. He was learning in Lakewood, and Reb Nosson Wachva, the Mashgiach, started a Kollel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's where I was born. But shortly after that, my parents moved to the 5 towns, where my father started... the Mesivta Teres Yaakov. It's today May, Mesivta Teres Yaakov, and then he joined Yeshiva Salshur. And that's where I grew up. I grew up in Woodmere. And Woodmere 30-something years ago, 40 years ago, was not what it is now. It was relatively unknown. I remember going to camp and people would say, Woodburn? You live in Woodburn the whole year? And today it's a different story. There's tremendous growth and tremendous amount of shuls, gehilas, yeshivas, Beis Yaakovs, kollel.
It's happening.
There's so much going on. It's an entirely different landscape. I look at my kids where they're growing up actually in Lakewood, but I didn't have the amount of community that they have today. But Baruch Hashem, it was good. So I grew up in Woodmere. I learned for high school, I went to South Shore for elementary. And for Mesivta High School, I went to Telz Yeshiva in Chicago. It's my mother's uncle, or Chaim Levine, Chazaq was a yeshiva. So I ended up over there, and I actually used to eat by him every Shabbos for a number of years, and I gained a lot from him and for the whole yeshiva. Afterwards, I lived in Brisk for a few years. I got married. I went back to Brisk. I was in Kollel in Lakewood for a number of years. I was in the big yeshiva for 1 year. Then there was a smaller Kollel for a few years. And then I got a phone call from my father one winter. It was probably about 11, 12 years ago, and he tells me that there's a 6th grade Rebbe in Yeshiva Salshur who was there for like 40 years. He was actually my Rebbe. and he's going to Eretz Yisrael for his grandson's wedding for a week, and he's retiring at the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
And do I want to sub for a week? And if I do a good job, then I could take over his class. So I said, I don't know about taking over his class, but yeah, I'll sub for a week. So I went in, I subbed for a week, and Baruch Hashem did a very good job. And the next year, I found myself filling the shoes of my sixth grade Rebbe, and I taught sixth grade. I ended up going back to Lakewood. I taught sixth grade in Lakewood Cheder, and I was teaching for 5 years. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. Just watching the kids come in the first day of the year, and there's something angelic about sixth graders, but there's also something mischievous about sixth graders, and it was a it's a challenge to mold them and to have them. The goal would be to have them eating out of your hands, and I think it did a good job. Baruch Hashem. And at the end of the year, what's fascinating is you see how that connection that you built with those kids is something incredible. Baruch Hashem. And then there came a point where, as my years of teaching were moving on, and I was supplementing my parnasa with other things, with side businesses. I was involved a little bit. I was like dabbling in mortgages and e-commerce, whatever it was, and I started realizing that my heart really was in the greater yeshiva system and the greater helping Klal Yisrael system. And,
right. So I was going to ask you, what was the turning point of when you were learning and teaching to getting more involved with Klal work, which is something that I know you're very much involved with.
So I think the turning point was that I was, a great kid, a great talmid in a class. Anyone could be the Rebbe, and anyone could be a great Rebbe. It's a challenging kids that a good Rebbe is able to turn those kids into great kids, and it needs a lot of focus, it needs a lot of attention. And when I found myself thinking much more of, wow, I really want to make this general yeshiva into a better yeshiva, or we could do so much more for all these types of kids. And I just found my thoughts and my heart drifting much more into the bigger picture rather than the kid in front of me. And I said, you know what, this is probably not the right thing for me to be here working with these kids who need a lot of focus. It's probably time for me to step out and move on to something broader. I want to say bigger, because the biggest thing really is to teach Torah to sixth graders or whatever it is, but something broader. And then my father was mentioning a few times, it was after my grandfather, Rabbi Kamenetzky, passed away.
Who had a very
was
close
nifter,
kesher
and
with
he was the founding Rosh Yeshiva and visionary, and he was just the
founder
larger,
of the Five Towns.
Founder of the Five Towns, the larger-than-life figure of the Five Towns. He started the first Young Israel. Woodmere started in his house. The first all-boys yeshiva. I mean, so much. We'll talk about him probably over the course of this conversation. Yeah. But he was nifter. And my father was hinting a few times that he'd love for me to come in, and I made the jump. And I left the classroom, and I went and told my father, and I'm still there as the associate dean of Yeshiva South Shore.
So filling the shoes of your holy grandfather, which you mentioned, Rabbi Kamenetzky, living up to the legacy of your family, the Kamenetzky dynasty legacy. How is it to have that?
So it's an interesting question. I used to get this question asked, much younger. And generally I was a good kid growing up. But the once in a while that I would make trouble, and I was in my grandfather's yeshiva, and I was making trouble, whatever it was. And I remember I had a sixth grade English teacher who was not Jewish, but she was a very nice teacher. And she would say, I remember her telling me one time, "What would your grandfather say to that?" And I realized that people are always going to be judging me after my father, my grandfather, and it is hard, but it's easy, it's a responsibility, but it also gives you a head start in life.
It does.
So the challenge would be, and that's how I see myself, what my role is, why Hashem put me here, is to continue the legacy of Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Binyamin, and my father, Mordechai, but to create my own path, use my own Tchunas and Nefesh, use my own derech. I remember talking to Rebellia Brudney one time, and I was talking about
Rebellia, who's been here at the Chazaq headquarters, very close to Chazaq, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah.
So he spoke to him
and he told me something. He said, you're not your father. I'll tell you why. Because you also have your mother and your mother's whole side. My mother's father, my mother's grandfather, the Levines and the Lipschitzes, also Rabbanim from Kovna of Massachusetts. My grandfather was his own gadol in his own right. And he said, you have your own genes and your own kochos. And that's really when I realized that, it's chizuk, but everyone realized, not only me, but it's everyone out there of course, you have where you come from, lo ani tchilas hakdusha, but you also have your own tchunas hanefesh, and you have to use your own kochas to form your path within the legacy of your abayim and your parents and your family.
I remember there was, I believe it was Rav Shach. I think it was him. But when he became the Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich, there were naysayers like everything else, and that happens. And they're like, who's what yichus? Like who's this and that? But they don't understand his family wasn't Rabbanim and stuff like that. But Rav Shach would understand with what I hear. What I read was that he says it's yichus starts now. It starts here. So those that don't have the yichus of Rav Yaakov Kamenetzky and Rav Binyamin and Rav Mordechai Bliana, the line is amazing and should continue at Mashiach. Yeah. But if there isn't, then we could start. You could start somewhere. You could be the first. And B'ezrat Hashem, you could lead to others. Please, of course. Two stories. One with Rav Yaakov Kamenetzky, my great grandfather, and one with my grandfather, Rav Yaakov Lipshitz, who was a Rav in Muncie, and he had a kashrus organization. He was the president of the OU kashrus division for a while, a long time ago. So we'll start with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetzky. It was one time he had my great grandfather, who was Rashiv and Tarvadas. He said a shir, a smicha shir, I think it was. I don't know exactly. I wasn't there, but he said a shir. And he prepared meticulously for his shir. There was one night that he went to a wedding or whatever it was and wasn't able to prepare, and he came the next day and he winged it, whatever he said, and the Talmidim were fascinated. And they came to him afterwards. They said, Rebbe, wow, that was an amazing shir. He said, I'll tell you the truth, I didn't prepare. But I think he told someone afterwards that he realized that, what I took out of the story is that he was preparing his whole life for the shir. He just let out from his heart. He let out. He told him over. The things that come out of the heart enter the head. Whatever Torah he was thinking, whatever he was mechash, whatever he remembered, he said over, the Talmidim loved it. That's one story with Rabbi Yaakov. And I'll tell you another story of my grandfather, of Yaakov Lipshitz, Chazaq Devracha, who was towards the latter part of his life, he was involved in kashrus. He was a shulrav, he was a paisik, he answered halachas, he was a darshan, and mainly his 9 to 5 was he had a kashrus organization, and he would get many calls from all over the world. People call him for everything, and a woman who didn't know called him up and said, Rabbi, what's the halacha, this and this and this? So he said, this is the halacha. So she said, how long have you been a rabbi? So he says, Mrs., I have been a rabbi for 400 years. That's because he comes from a dynasty of Rabbanim. His great-grandfather was Rabbi Yaakov Levi Lipshitz, was the secretary of Rabbi Yitzchak Chana Inspector, who was the Kovner Rav. He came for 400 years worth of Rabbanos. Rabbi Yitzchak Chana Inspector, as we mentioned, was the Rav in Kovna in Europe, and they had that direct lineage from there. So every person, it's not only someone with the name Kamenetzky or the name Lipshitz or the name Levine, but it's every person is a grandchild of his grandfather, of Avram Avinu, of his Rabbeim. It's lo ani tchilas hakdusha. Everyone is able to take. There are so many Rabbeim, Gedolim, leaders today, who are people who answered the call of their parents and their Rabbeim, and they came. They've been Rabbeim for 400 years. Yes, 100%. Very, very inspiring. So now that you're involved more with the Klal Yisrael in a sense, what projects have you been involved with lately?
So the project that I'm very proud of is this project which I mentioned earlier, and that is the Sefer Chelkas Binyamin.
Your grandfather.
This is the Sefer that I put out from my grandfather's writings. My grandfather, Binyamin Kamenetzky, those of you who were zocheh to know him, founded Yeshiva South Shore in 1956. He moved from East New York to the Five Towns. Famous story. He was living in East New York. He was a Rebbe in the Yeshiva Torah Chaim in East New York, and there was a kid who came from Cedarhurst every day to East New York, and the parents of this kid kept on asking my grandfather to come visit. We have to start a yeshiva here, and long story short, he went to visit, and he said, let me think about this, and he asked Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetzky, his father, should I move to Woodmere, which was then unknown. It was a waspy neighborhood, anti-Semitic, very high-end, think of like the Lawrence Country Club. Then that's what it was. It was, very wealthy, white, upper-class Gentiles. But should I move there and start a yeshiva? And Rabbi Yaakov told him, the Torah was given in the desert. Midbar Sinai, Har Sinai is a desert. And if you go to the desert, the Torah will grow.
Wow.
So he went and he did it. And he was just a larger-than-life figure. He was an embodiment of Avas Yisrael, Avas Torah. And the same day, he could have been conversing with Chassidish Rebbe, who he came from. My grandmother was from a Hasidic dynasty. My grandfather could have been in the morning in Borough Park talking to a Hasidic Rebbe, and in the afternoon by a completely assimilated Jew trying to convince him to send his kids to yeshiva. And he was like that his entire life. And when he was nifter about 7-8 years ago, my father found notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of Divrei Torah, of speeches, of chidushim, some that he wrote in his days in Eretz Yisrael, which was during World War II in the late 30s. He wrote down shiurim. Some of it was when he was in Kollel, and most of it was his drushas that he gave at bar mitzvahs, at weddings, at chasanas. He wrote everything down, but it was completely scattered and disorganized. And spent a few years and raised a lot of money, and we hired a team of professionals and we worked with them. And Baruch Hashem, after a few years, I was able to put out the Sefer Chalkas Binyamin of his life's work. And after I published the Sefer, so we started translating it in English and sending out a weekly email of a Dvar Torah with a story in English.
Right.
Did that for a few years. And then I realized there was so much that the Sefer Emes Liyaakov from Rabbi Kamenetzky, my great-grandfather, so much in that Sefer. So I started doing a 5-minute weekly video share of a piece of a Dvar Torah from the Emes Liyaakov. In addition to that, I started also a Balaturim weekly video share also. So we have now the Emes Liyaakov and the Balaturim, in addition to the archives of the English Chalkas Binyamin. And that was something that my grandfather would constantly bring down the Balaturim and pull out lessons from the Balaturim.
Amazing,
it's fascinating,
lessons.
and Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of great feedback, and everyone is welcome to join.
100%. How does one join? How does
right now it's a WhatsApp group. Hopefully we'll get on to Torah anytime. If you can help me with that.
Yeah, Chazaq.
Onto Chazaq, definitely. We could send it to you. But text 917-696-4043 or email sk@rbklegacy.org. That's 917-696-4043 or sk@rbklegacy.org.
What's RBK
And we'll add you on
legacy?
to the
That's
Rabbi
Binyamin
Kamenetzky legacy. And we'll add you on to the groups.
Amazing. I see the picture. It gives me so many fun memories of seeing your father. I had a meeting in his house about the work of Chazaq. I'll never forget this. How not only did the Rav give encouragement, give his full support, but he pulls out a checkbook from his pocket and he writes a check to Chazaq for all the work that we did.
Wow.
So that was, we were young back then. This was the beginning stages.
Can I tell everyone to do the same thing?
100%. We could definitely use it. We'd be forever appreciative and grateful. I actually have a picture of that check somewhere in the files. But besides that, Baruch Hashem, he had a very close kasher with my cousins and family members and uncle who now live in Arizona, but they had a kasher with the Rav, and he came to the wedding, I remember, and to different smachot, and always, the Rav was a magnet.
Yeah.
People would see him; they would all crowd around him, and he gave us a lot of chizuk.
Yeah.
Baruch
And a lot of the Divrei Torah were written on various receipts or stationaries of hotels that he would stay in by.
Wow.
And there was a few from Phoenix.
Oh,
actually,
interesting.
From Arizona. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I think there was a bakery or something from Phoenix that they have some Divrei Torah written. One tidbit about my grandfather. I was interviewing a friend of his, someone by the name of Rabbi Shmuel Shulman, who has since passed away, who was with him together in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. And he
Baltimore.
was talking about, in Baltimore in the late 30s and 40s, and he was talking about my grandfather as a bacher, that he was always involved in everything. I think he told me that he went to the Rabbi's March. He snuck out of yeshiva as a bacher and went to the famous Rabbi's March in Washington. But he said he had a radio that he always wanted to know the news. He always wanted to know how he could help, and so even as a young man. There's a picture that was going around. I think I might have sent it around of my grandfather in a drugstore with must have been in the winter, with his coat and his hat, wearing gloves, and he's hugging a Jew. You don't see the Jew's face, but an old Jew, obviously not a Talmid Chacham, someone wearing, you could tell he was a simple Jew, hugging him. And someone asked me, what's the story behind this picture? And I said, that's the story. I don't know if there was a story. I don't know if he even met this person before, but that's the story. He was someone who loved all Jews.
That's greatness.
And everyone respected him so much. And it was amazing that he was able to relate to people on all sides of the aisle of all spectrums of Judaism. Religious, traditional, anti-religious, Hasidish, Satmar, Zionist, everything. I was with him in Eretz Yisrael in the later years of his life. And I was walking with him by Schneller, which is today apartments, but then it was still an army base, and there were soldiers outside. He stopped each soldier, gave him a hug, and he wrote down their name. He says, "Our Talmidim want to daven for you." He wrote down the names, and he told me, "I have this great idea. We're going to have an organization." I still remember. He said, "We're going to call it Irgun Achim Letzara."
Wow.
And we're going to have names of soldiers, and the boys will daven. He was always looking to do something, always looking to do for the klal, and he loved everyone. But what's fascinating is that when we saw these notes and we saw these Divrei Torah, and we were looking at them, and my father said, we have to put out the Sefer.
The Klal Yisrael, yeah.
We show Klal Yisrael that you can't just be a non-thinking Jew and just love everyone. It has to be rooted in something. And in this Sefer is really where I took a lot of inspiration, because this Sefer has in it Divrei Torah that he said he was Machadash himself. He developed these Divrei Torah himself. A lot of it is from Chassidish Rebbes who he got to know through his father-in-law, who was the Ostrov Kalashina Rebbe of the Bronx. A lot of it is from the Brisk. A lot of it is from the Gedolim of America. Some Rav Moshe Feinstein he quotes, conversations that he had. Rav Hutner he quotes. I mean, there's so
Being
many.
the son of the Gadol or
Yeah,
Rav
and
Yaakov
of course from Rav
Kamenetzky.
Yaakov also.
And
Yeah.
I'm seeing the Kesher to Rav Moshe and to all these Gedolei Yisrael. And interesting tidbit or FYI is that Rav Binyamin is older than Rav Shmuel.
Yes, Rav Yaakov was older than Rav Shmuel.
That's right.
Yeah, in fact, in these notebooks we found letters also. There is a fascinating letter that which speaks about Rav Shmuel wrote it to Rav Yaakov. I'm sorry, it's Rav Yaakov's letter back to Rav Shmuel.
To Philadelphia.
But it was before he was in Philadelphia. This is when Rav Shmuel was a bacher in Ner Yisrael.
Oh, wow.
And Rav Shmuel came to learn in Ner Yisrael. My grandfather was there first. And apparently there was some sibling rivalry. My grandfather was older. He was there first. And then Rav Shmuel came. And Rav Shmuel, whatever the dynamic was, Rav Shmuel complained to my grandfather, to Rav Yaakov, about that dynamic.
Oh, wow.
And this is a letter back from Rav Yaakov to Rav Shmuel to tell him how to be nice to my grandfather, even though he's coming in or whatever it was. I think he references a story that they were learning together, and Rav Shmuel and Binyamin, and a boy came to talk to them and learning, and he was talking to Rav Shmuel the whole time, and not to Rav Binyamin. Rav Binyamin was asking Rav Yaakov how to deal with that. And Rav Yaakov wrote back to Rav Shmuel how he should, fascinating things. Then I have a lot of other letters. Just what today we would text, how brothers would text. Then there were letters. Rav Shmuel left Ner Yisrael, went to learn in Philadelphia. It led to learn in Lakewood. And my
BMG.
grandfather and then I don't know if it was called BMG back then, but
Aaron Cutler.
Aaron Cutler, yeah. And my
It
grandfather.
wasn't BMG?
Yeah, it was BMG, but I think the terminology, the slang of BMG came much later.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, BMG. And my grandfather was learning in Ner Yisrael. And then my grandfather got married and was living in the Bronx for a little bit. And there's letters back and forth, about, I left my coat. Can you bring my coat? How much does he owe me? I brought him those svarim. I laid out the money. How much? Like things that today we would text.
Wow.
And I have a lot of these letters, just regular correspondences. But then there's other correspondences also with Rabbanim, and they're talking about, Rav Yaakov famously moved to Toronto, so they're talking about the Canadian visas, and there's so many fascinating.
And you have hold of all these.
I have those letters, yeah.
Unbelievable and very interesting. And the Sefer is available in all Judaica stores.
Should be.
Yeah, should be. Okay.
If now I have to speak to the distributor to get more.
But Chalkas Binyamin, Binyamin, everyone is encouraged to check it out. B'ezrat Hashem. We have a Minhag custom, Rabbi Kamenetzky, a final message for our broad audience.
Okay, final message. So it's tough. There's so many messages to bring out.
I could just imagine we could go on and on.
So I've besides for the yeshiva, I've been involved also in
Yeshiva South Shore.
Yeshiva South Shore, consulting for many
Amazing
organizations,
building,
nonprofits, and fundraising, and the yeshiva building, and Bika Cholims, and so many organizations.
Soon to be Chazaq as well, B'ezrat Hashem.
Hopefully. And through these, I've got to meet and deal with a spectrum, across the spectrum of Jews, and what I realize is that some people, that they have a passion for some causes. Obviously, obviously wealthy people, they want to give, they want to be philanthropists to certain causes, and some people certain causes don't talk to them, but each person can have an impact. He has his mission and his legacy that he wants to leave. But you're part of an entire Klal Yisrael, and someone comes to you for a yeshiva, and it's not your son's yeshiva, but stop. There's a Torah. The Torah has there's Torah, there's Chesed, there's Achnasat Kala, there's Kiruv, there's Chazaq, there's Ahavas Yisrael. There's so many facets. So even though you may be focused on one, but stop and think and absorb, what can I learn from this person? What can I learn from this organization? And it doesn't have to be your life's mission, but it's someone else's life's mission, and that person is part of Klal Yisrael, and you're part of that Klal Yisrael. Have that heart, and give them that time, give it the consideration, and realize that chashivut, that importance of where they fit into Klal Yisrael. And when you do that, you become beloved.
100%.
Become beloved by everyone.
100%.
And maybe I'll leave with a story. There was a woman who I met out of the 5 towns. A woman looked like a Rebbitzin, like a complete. Imagine a Rebbitzin. That's what she looked like. And she says, "Are you Kamenetzky from South Shore?" Yes. And she almost starts crying, and she says her grandchildren are in South Shore. And I know the grandchildren. They didn't look like they matched up to this grandmother, but she said that her son was in yeshiva that was very much a box, and he didn't fit in, and he had a very hard childhood. And it always bothered her that he never really became who he could have become. But then my grandchildren are in South Shore, she says, I have now a nechama, I have a comfort. Seeing my grandchildren appreciated for who they are. And now that they're steiging, they're growing in their own way. And that, with that hug that I spoke about earlier with my grandfather, that's what we do in Yeshiva South Shore. There's no box. Obviously, a school is a school, right? It's a framework. You have to conform to the framework, but within that framework, it's so broad, and there's so many different types of Jews, and they're all good, they're all great, and they each have a role of Klal Yisrael. Can we be better as a nation? Yes. Can we be better as individuals? Yes. But to have that acceptance, to embrace one another, doesn't mean you have to become them. You could still stay who you are, create your own path, which within your legacy. But there's 12 Shvatim in Klal Yisrael. Stay in your shevet, but to have that heart and to realize where you fit into the entire Klal Yisrael and where someone else also fits into the entire Klal Yisrael.
Amazing, Rabbi Shmuel, Kamenetzky, Shlita. Such chizuk, such inspiration. Baruch Hashem, a legacy, an amazing legacy. Rabbi Yaakov, Rav Binyamin, your father, Hashem should continue giving me chizuk and strength. Rav Mordechai, we had the zchut to have a Torah talk on the life legacy of Chaim Kanievsky, where there's some mishpacha over there, I believe. And we want to remind everyone, every single Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Chazaq Torah Talks with special guests. Special thank you to all the various platforms that are hosting our Torah Talks podcast. We get tremendous feedback, and we really appreciate it. Special shout out to our friends at Torah Anytime, and also to Daily Giving. $1 a day really goes a very, very far way. We're very appreciative of their support to Chazaq, and thank you to Natan Behar, the media director of Chazaq, behind the camera, doing an amazing job with the video and editing. Thank you to the entire staff and board members and supporters and everyone that's involved. We really appreciate it. We should only hear Besarot about only goodness.
Amen.
Chazaq.
Thank you so much.